Good evening and welcome to the Cedar Falls School Board of Education meeting on August 10th. I want to welcome you all. We are here at the City Council chambers, but hopefully you're able to join us by channel 15 or by the Zoom link. And if you have anyone else that would like to join us, that is available on our website, the link for that. Otherwise, welcome to the meeting. I do need to read a brief statement because we are continuing to participate in this meeting electronically as well. A government body may conduct a meeting by electronic means only in circumstances where such a meeting in person is impossible or impractical, and only if the governmental body provides public access to the conversation of the meeting to the extent reasonably possible. The place of the meeting is the place in which the communication originates, and the minutes of the meeting shall include a statement explaining why the meeting in person was impossible or practical, as pursuant to Iowa Code 21.8. And of course, we are continuing to utilize electronic means due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have one board member, Mr. Gruber, who is joining us via Zoom and telephone here this evening. I will now call the meeting to order, and we will move to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? So moved from Dr. Heisterkamp. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Thank you, Ms. Leeper. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Same sign. Motion carries. Moving to public comment, we have one individual that has expressed an interest to provide a public comment this evening. That is Ms. Jennifer Schultz. Are you on the line, Ms. Schultz?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. If you would, please proceed with your public comment. You will have 3 minutes for your comment.
Okay, I would say the sound on this end is terrible, so just so you know.
Okay, well, we can...
My husband Ryan and I,
Yep.
Pardon?
Sorry, I was just going to tell you, we can hear you fairly well, so hopefully that's also the
Okay,
case.
perfect.
Yep.
All right. My husband Ryan and I have been teaching and coaching in the Cedar Falls district for a combined 43 years. We are parents to Bryant and Allison, who attend Aldridge Elementary. Our son has 3 identified risk factors for severe consequence with COVID: underdeveloped lungs, time spent on a ventilator as a baby, ongoing asthma that's required hospitalizations, and developmental delays due to prematurity. As we speak, sports teams are postponing seasons. Schools in session are closing due to COVID outbreaks. Government offices are closed. And this very meeting is not physically open to the public. But nearly 6,000 students and 800 staff will be gathering in 2 weeks in person in CF. The optics are unsettling and do not bolster confidence for school safety. Common sense says we're not ready for in-person learning, where social distancing, our best tool, cannot be assured. I was recently denied the reasonable accommodation to teach remotely. I was denied not because of the lack of medical relevance, but because too many others in my content area have underlying issues. And this feels wrong, not equitable, and does not make us feel valued as employees or as a family. Our doctor spoke to us about our son Bryant's risk factors and how we could best protect him. He recommended virtual learning for Bryant and that I be allowed to remote teach to limit my exposure. This combination would ensure the safest environment. Imagine being told you can't do the thing that would best ensure your child's safety. On top of the stress and sleepless nights, we've been forced into having heart-wrenching discussions. Do one or both of us resign? Do we sell our house? Can we afford to find somebody qualified enough to teach our kids at home? And even at that, I'm still putting them in danger by coming home with exposure at work. Do I wear a mask and social distance from my own children? Do we need life insurance on the kids? And are our wills updated? These are real discussions. The governor's proclamations make your job difficult, but we haven't seen any change in the start from the in-person learning we seem locked into from the start. There is new data on this virus, and the long-term effects are unknown. Children can spread it. 97,000 children have tested positive in the United States the last 2 weeks of July. Many comparable districts are looking to the hybrid plan that enables more social distancing, cohort groups to make contact tracing easier, and it would seem the safety is dependent on the creativity and concern of the local district. The crowded hallway pictures in the national news look like my school. We know the best place for kids is in school, and my children need to be there too. Schools provide social and emotional and physical health, but these needs can be addressed through creative solutions in a hybrid option, as many other districts
Ms.
are doing.
Schultz, Ms. Schultz?
Yes.
Yeah, if you could just wrap up your comments.
I have 2 more paragraphs, and I was in the start talking about the sound, which is terrible. So if you would please give me a little grace here.
Well, I did start it when you started, after I mentioned to you the 3 minutes. So.
Okay. I'm an employee and a parent, and you also work for me as a student. So I would really like to.
Well, and I appreciate that, and I really appreciate that you sharing your comments. And if you have a couple more paragraphs, could you send that to each of us, each of the board members, please?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. Moving now to the communications.
Yeah, we'll have the communications update that'll pull up real quick here. A few things we'll talk about, and then we have some videos at the end. First of all, just wanted to mention congratulations to our baseball team on making it to the state tournament. First time in 31 years that they were able to make it there. It was definitely a unique year, but they persevered, so congratulations to those teams and the coaches. Also wanted to do a congratulations to Orchard Hill Elementary. This is a long overdue congratulations. It was actually in May, I believe, they received the announcement of becoming a Lighthouse school. The Lighthouse certification is through the Leader in Me program, and it's for those that have taken that process to its deepest and most impactful level of implementation. They were actually able to do the announcement via a Zoom call with all of those staff. Those were a couple of students there on the left that were able to make that announcement to everyone there that's made a big impact. So congratulations to Orchard Hill Elementary, all of their staff as well. Also wanted to tell congrats to Ethan Weekman and Nate Clayberg of CF CAPS. They were named the first CAPS Network Contributor of the Year award winners. This award is for selfless dedication to the purpose of the work and support of the CAPS Network affiliates. In May this past year, they had a whole it was the Preparing for Your Purpose, and they had a lot of workshops and conversations surrounding different occupations and jobs, and they really then opened that up to across the country. Also wanted to mention we have the Cedar Valley CAPS Network, which is going to be in 6 school districts starting this fall, and that's a big part into the work of Ethan and Nate. The Tiger Booster Club is taking memberships again this year. Last year they raised over $80,000 for our student athletes at the high school, Pete, and Holmes Junior High. Individuals and businesses are able to join. There's also advertising opportunities. You're able to get to the Tiger Booster Club if you go to cfschools.org and then to the high school, and then it's along the left side of the navigation. You're able to get to the Booster Club, and you can find information on joining online. Also wanted to mention there's going to be a fundraising night for the Booster Club Wednesday, August 19th, 5 to 7. It's going to be at Iowa Sports Supply. A percentage of the proceeds will go directly to the Booster Club, and then teachers and staff will also get 20% off with their school ID. So special thanks to Iowa Sports Supply for the partnership. We have our Return to Learn planning and information on our website. If you go to cfschools.org, you're able to get directly to this website. We have frequently asked questions for our families, frequently asked questions for staff, and then the full PDF of the Return to Learn plan. The frequently asked questions we're continually updating as information changes and we have additional questions. So we definitely encourage our families and staff to go and check that regularly. Our Return to Learn planning has been happening all summer. Hundreds of people have been meeting and making plans, and we're getting close to that kind of implementation time. One of the things we're going to be doing is releasing a series of videos on all the changes that are going to be happening across the district. So we're going to have a couple videos. The first one's going to be talking about our food service, transportation, and facilities. And then each of the individual buildings are doing videos as well to talk about the changes. So then we'll have a quick video on the changes at Holmes Junior High.
The changes we'll see, especially for elementary, they will be eating in the classroom, and so the kids will still get to come down to pick up their food. They will have a container. We're gonna go with one hot entree and of course the Tiger lunch or a cold lunch, so they can choose still. And then we will have all packaged fresh fruits and vegetables, so there will be no open salad bars. Picking up, that kind of thing. And we're using reusable containers, which is really nice, so we're not using any of the foam. out, but we will still provide special diets, whoever needs that. That's not going to change.
Obviously, as far as cleaning the buses, we're going to be doing that. We'll be disinfecting them once a day. And so that's our commitment to the parents. And the drivers will be taking care of that, and they'll be trained in how to make sure that we're getting that done correctly. The drivers will be mandated to wear at least the face mask, and if they have a problem with that, because like for instance myself with glasses with the face mask on, sometimes your glasses fog up. We also are providing all the drivers with a face shield, and if they have to wear one or the other at all times while students are on board the bus. If they have a problem with the masks fogging their glasses, then like for instance myself, I could wear the face shield, and that should protect me and the students, you know, from as they come in. When they get on the bus, those first few students, that they go to the back of the bus and we load it forward again, so that we're just not walking past each other on the bus as little as possible. We're going to assign seats. So the way that it's going to student is in that first day is probably going to be their assigned seat. We are going to, at the grade schools, we will be staggering the bus release, so that we're not going to just, normally the way it would happen in the grade schools, so K through 6, when we get to the grade schools, they don't want us to release the students until 8:30. And so historically what would have happened then, if the bus got there, say at 8:25, they would just come into the bus circle and they'd sit and wait until 8:30, then they'd open the doors, and you can imagine it's a sea of students leaving the buses. Obviously we don't want that to happen, nor do the schools. So what will happen is we'll stagger it. The first bus that's there, we'll release at 8:30. The next bus will wait until they see the students kind of dissipate and go into the building, and then once they do, then they'll open their door and they'll let those students off, and just on down the line.
And to make some big changes on how we approach cleaning facilities, or how we're going to clean facilities, making plans and preparations for what kinds of equipment we might need. We did determine that we purchased 20 misters that we can use to sanitize spaces after the buildings are cleaned each night, which will kill the virus if there's anything on surfaces and that type of thing. We have changed the way that we manage our HVAC systems. We're allowing units to run around the clock now to help ventilate spaces, as opposed to normally during energy conservation measures we shut buildings down in the afternoon after the kids leave for the day, and then they don't come back on until the next morning. So they'll be running around the clock now. We changed the style of filters that we're using, and we've upped those from a MERV 8 to a MERV 13. So that'll trap a little bit more of the virus and try to keep that out of the buildings. Determined early on was that water fountains were not to be used, and so we have a number of bottle filling water fountain combination type units around the district, and so we are able to alter those and disable the bubbler but still allow the bottle filler to work, so they'll be able to do that. We've also added some in places where they didn't have bottle filling stations, they were just plain water fountains. And so we're able to change those out, and we bought some new pieces of equipment to put in those places. And so hopefully that'll help a little bit more with keeping people away from the fountainhead. What we did is our carpentry shop was able to construct some screens with plexiglass, clear plexiglass, to help put that barrier between the public and our secretarial staff, which are first line folks on the scene. So we made quite a number of those, and for others if they need them, as needed. The district has purchased 120 freestanding hand sanitizing stations that will be placed around the buildings in hallways and public spaces. We also purchased a number of sanitizing spray bottles that we can have sanitizer in for each classroom. So when they have opportunity, they can wipe tables and counters and desks down to keep that clean.
One thing that we are asking students to do before they come to school is to do a quick health screen. So at home, before you come to school, if you could, take your temperature, look for symptoms of COVID-19. So we do have some changes this year, but many things do stay the same as it relates to entering the building. Drop-off will still be at the front of the building for parents who are dropping off, and bus students will still come into the activities entrance. One thing that is different this year is we do have one directional traffic. So Students and parents, when they come into the building during passing times, we will be asking that they go one direction to limit the number of interactions that we have throughout the school day. Also, during passing periods, students will be coming out of the main academic hallways and going one direction, and this center part will act like a giant roundabout, so that way students can efficiently and safely get to class. We do have some changes with lockers this year. We are going to allow students to wear backpacks to limit the amount that we are using lockers this year. So many of our classrooms will look a lot different this year as well. Teachers have taken out many of their own personal comfier chairs and fabric chairs so that we can space desks out just a little bit more. When social distancing isn't possible within a classroom, we will be asking students and teachers to wear a mask. Throughout the school day, we will also be taking some mask breaks or even having classes outside when possible. One thing in addition that we're doing this year in our classrooms is we're trying to space out the desks as much as possible. You'll notice that for each classroom, it might look a little bit different depending on the number of students that will be in the classroom. So student desks will be as far apart as possible. In addition, desks oftentimes will be facing forward so that we limit the amount that students are in face-to-face contact.
Just a quick overview of what Holmes, just a snippet of that video that we're putting together, but then each of the buildings will be doing that since each of them kind of have distinct differences as far as the changes they've all been making. So we'll be sharing those out to our families very soon.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, moving on in the agenda to the approval of the 2020-2021 legislative priorities. Dr. Petit.
Yes, so there is a presentation to be able to pull up on that, and it does go through just the 3 legislative priorities that we are recommending. We met as a committee, I believe, last week, and they're each pulled a little bit different, but they're pulled from some of the recommendations that we saw at our last meeting based on some of the things that we've done in past years. So number 7, this is the first one that we recommend. Number 7 is the list from ISAB number. So it's 7th on their list that they give to us, but it's mental health. And this is really focused on providing supports that establish comprehensive community mental health systems. And you can see each of those bullets. We had this in place last year. There was some discussion at the state level regarding this as well from the legislative level, and several different entities across the state that are advocating for this very important component, and we believe it should continue to be part of our legislative priority platform.
Sorry, just a clarifying question. It's called number 7. That's because it was pulled out of something else?
Yeah, so there is a list of roughly 30 to 35 sample legislative priorities from the Iowa Association of School Boards. So this was number 7 on that overall list.
Correct. Thanks.
Yep. Next slide is supplemental state aid. Again, this was number 19 on their overall list. This is something that we've had in previous years as well. We did add some additional language to this. You can see in red that also includes preschool with supplemental state aid for expansion of 4-year-old programming. This just goes through and talks about the hope and the intent that this is something that is the supplemental state aid, which is the state funding, can be done in a timely manner, but it's also at a level that allows us to sustain and continue to expand the programming across districts in the state of Iowa. Again, we thought it was important to include preschool within this as well. Then
Can I ask a quick question
Please.
about that one? So is that qualifier predominantly because of the amount of money that we would hope to receive so that it would cover that? Does it also include timing? I mean, if we have to make our budgets ahead of time and we aren't sure of what our budget's going to look like, does that impact our ability to then commit funds for preschool programming and let families know that that's going to be available?
So there's an entire priority listed to preschool. However, we didn't have that one on, knowing that there are some other priorities that might be important. We just didn't want to leave that off. So this one has multiple functions and factions. Right now, we are funded at 0.5 of the overall per pupil allotment for preschool. That allows us to kind of hold steady with the current cost, but we can't expand preschool due to that. Funding's always 1 year in arrears, so it's always 1 year behind when you serve those students. So when you do expand, it takes a lot of cash on hand to be able to expand those programs. And if we really want to make sure that we are looking at programming, curriculum, it's very difficult to be able to stay within that 0.5 funding formula for those students. And if we're looking to expand those services, that would have to change.
Thank you.
Isn't there, sorry, going off of that, I mean, there's also, we don't receive any infrastructure funds so we receive 0.5 for delivering the education section of it, but we really don't have a funding source for building the classrooms that the kids are taught in.
Correct, yes. These numbers don't account and don't go towards our either 1 cent sales tax dollars that we are allocated by the state and some other funding. So those aren't included with the preschool dollars.
Right.
Correct.
So if we were, in order to really, if we wanted to do a full preschool program, we need both the funds for the infrastructure and the funds for the instruction in order to be able to roll that out to all eligible preschools.
Yes, much wider audience, correct.
Yep, gotcha. Thank you.
Number 3 that we recommended is number 26 on the list, and we added a fairly expansive bullet at the end, but this was really local accountability and decision-making, that we think it's important that we as local districts have the ability to make local decisions, to be able to use local control in the right way, knowing as elected officials that you have the knowledge and ability to make decisions that are important for our local dynamics. This goes through, we had this one last year as well, but we, as a committee, talked through especially the flexibility on health and safety. I think as we all know, with the governor's recommendations or guidance, or I guess decisions that were made here at the middle of July, we don't have some of the local control that we thought we would have when it comes to the pandemic response. And here we just said school board should have the ability to make decisions regarding local health and safety needs of the community, parents, staff, and students. Local control must not be stripped for purposes of politics. Statewide expectations are based upon metrics that do not adhere necessarily to the guidelines that we have or take into account local challenges. So we thought that was important to add, just to say, you know, we talk about local control, local decision making. In times of greatest need, we need to continue to have that intact to make the best decisions possible.
Can, on that last item that read, can you talk a little bit about the cudgels that the Department of Ed and the governor would have to use if we decided to rebel and say, take a different route, decide to go 100% online, for instance?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different things, and number one, they have stated that any of those days won't be counted within your calendar, won't be counted within the completion and requirements of the education for your district, which could include, you know, the graduation requirements and students receiving credit. Number two, which was unsaid, but I believe it would be a factor, any days that are not counted, I believe would probably be prorated for funding purposes, which I think would be the state aid, the supplemental state aid that we just talked about, that would more than likely be withheld. And then there was also the component in there that talked about an ethics complaint to the administrators of districts for violating that mandate. So I think there are several different layers to that, and I think important layers to note.
Andy, on Iowa Public Radio, they interviewed Brad Buck and other education officials on the show, and they spoke explicitly about this.
Is your microphone on, Alan? Just double check.
Testing 1, 2.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, just want to make sure. Yep.
So, and he made an interesting comment that I think is shared by a lot of educators when the statement from the governor's office came out, and that had to do with the metrics that were being used moving forward to determine when a school could make a move, which wasn't consistent with the public health and the CDC numbers. So where do we stand as a district?
So this is as a former social studies teacher, U.S. government, U.S. history teacher, one of the things that I've said quite frequently, I don't always agree with some of the rules, regulations, mandates that are in place. So it's my responsibility to try to work towards changing those. I think the metrics aren't the best metrics to use, and I think there's been people across the health spectrum that have said the same thing. But right now, those are the metrics that we've been told we have to use to be able to apply for the waiver. So how do we set up our parameters to make sure that we're making the best decisions possible, balancing that with also trying to stay within those edicts, because we have been, how do I say this the best way, limited with the ability to make local decisions. That has to be approved by the state, and it has to be approved by the statewide public health department as well.
Thank you. We will have much more discussion on the return to learn plans coming up in
But
just a few bullet points.
Just mention just a little bit about this process, that
Yeah.
this is Iowa Association of School Boards legislative priorities. This is not necessarily what they're going to do, but this is what Cedar Falls School Board recommends, 3 priorities that they focus on right now. And I'm sure other schools will have similar wording in some of theirs, and we will get together at our annual meeting, and we'll have an elected person from our board who has a weighted vote, and will help decide what those priorities will be and what we'll be pushing for in the legislature.
Yeah, thank you very much for explaining the process behind the process. Yeah, thank you very much. So, procedural question, is this something that we need to vote on?
It is.
As a board? Okay.
Yep.
All right, very good.
And I'm looking at board members that were on that committee. Any things that we missed, that we discussed, talked about on that was Mr. Gruber, Dr. Heisterkamp, and Mr. Orvis.
Dr. Petit, this is Nate. It sounds about what we talked about on Monday to me.
Other than some more detail on the return to learn plan, which we'll get to here in a little bit.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for covering it.
Can I just add real quickly that all districts get an opportunity to submit their top priorities. All of the whole list of priorities exists for the Iowa Association of School Boards, but we each get to submit our top priorities, and then we look at what everybody has submitted, and the ones that rise to the top are the ones that receive the heavy advocacy during the next legislative session. So,
Very good. Thank you. So with that, I'm looking for a motion to approve these priorities.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Orris. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Thank you, Ms. Hines. Seeing that we've already had discussion, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to approval of board policy 504.5.2.
Yeah, so typically this would go through a policy committee. However, this is something that we just received the sample policy last week, as did everybody across the state from the Iowa Association of School Boards. It was actually their legal policy fund that provided this for districts across the state. This is part of the new Title IX changes that are occurring at the federal level. In fact, this is something that impacts all pre-K-12 institutions as well as secondary institutions across the country. It goes into really discrimination prohibited on gender, and it goes into a little bit of detail about who you report to. There's going to be some fingers and some different changes that are going to come off of this policy that we'll bring back to our policy committee members as well as the full board coming up in September at the next meeting. But this is the policy that needs to be in place to ensure that we are following the law as this does go into effect on August 14th. So we have gone through, I think Adrian and I sat in, Dr. Talbot and I, in a 2-hour training webinar, then an 8-hour training webinar, and then we've had some other training components. There are some other requirements that we'll put into place. We can go into great detail about some of the specifics. I believe Dr. Heisterkamp sat in on one of the webinars with us as well when he joined. So A lot of information. It looks like a short policy, but it's a policy based on the components that need to be in place, and then we'll set the administrative regulations and practices surrounding the specific intent of the code.
All right, thank you.
Is there a requirement that our staff have any additional training or screening or any other?
Yes, there is. So we went through our administrative team this past week and a half ago, and had some training components there. We'll have some other training components with our full staff as well.
And a lot of people are familiar with Title IX in terms of athletics, but this is well beyond the scope of just athletics, right? That's where it seemed to get its first notoriety, but this encompasses everything that goes on in our school setting, is that correct?
That is correct. So it deals with all programs and all components of the now really PK-20 institutions. There are some different layers and some different metrics at the post-secondary level than at the secondary level and elementary level, but there's several different measures, different I guess, protocols that are going to be in place that we need to make sure that we are enacting. And there's just many, many details that are involved with it.
And it would go beyond gender discrimination, but would also include gender identity and sexual orientation and quite a broad scope of things that...
Yeah, and that was clarified actually by the Supreme Court here recently in July, that ensured and kind of made known that both Title VII and Title IX gender identity is a component and part of those, correct?
Good questions?
Andy?
Yeah.
Several challenges, but some of the main challenges for districts have been historically, even before these changes, have been the communication component of Title IX and communicating to parents, to those who feel like they have been on the receiving end of harassment or harm. So the challenge of communicating and making that information accessible, like in the communications, is one major challenge I think districts, K-12 schools have had. Secondly, on the component to training, to Jeff's point, not just staff, but I think we've had challenges to educate our students, right, on the policies, what constitutes harassment, how do we define those terms, et cetera. So by the protected classes. So thank you in advance for working out the details to that lengthy and important law.
Extremely important, and it's one of those things that, as we talk equity later on in the meeting, is an important part of that.
With that, do I have a motion to approve the board policy?
I move that the Cedar Falls Community School District Board of Education approve the first and final reading of Board Policy 504.5.2, discrimination and harassment based on sex prohibited.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Ms. Leeper, thank you very much. I think we've already had comments. I will move to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving now to a return to learn plan discussion. Ms. Leeper, sorry. Yep, no problem.
So, return to learn. First off, I think it would be important to briefly address some of the public comments too with return to learn. One of the things that I think all institutions, all entities have struggled with as we look towards how do we return to learning, what does that look like across the state, across the country, really across the world. We've done a lot of surveying, asking families, asking staff for some of their opinions, even asking students for some of their opinions. One of the things that we knew that we were required to do was accommodate anybody that has what the CDC called, it was the Category 1 condition that would cause them to be in a high medically at-risk, fragile situation. So we not only asked for Category 1 medical fragile situations, we did ask our staff, who might have a Category 2 health condition, and then also potentially family conditions. I guess as we looked at this, the first category, Category 1, it's a required expectation that there are reasonable accommodations put into place. For us, those that had Category 2 illnesses, challenges, we really wanted to and really worked hard to try to accommodate each of those. Those that had family challenges, we really worked hard and tried to accommodate as well. But again, there's different layers. There's a required layer, and then there's a really want to and really working hard to try to make those accommodations. So I think that's important to note, and we've really tried to work through that diligently. So Return to Learn plan, again, Janelle went through this really well. We've worked with a lot of different groups and organizations. In fact, hundreds of hours by multiple committees and different groups and individuals, obviously. Our focus has been on health and safety protocols. That was the first time I'd seen some of those videos, which was really, really good, to be able to talk about some of the things that we're doing as it comes to not only lunchroom, but hallway safety, work in the classrooms, as well as just some of the things we're doing with all the residual services when it comes to transportation on top of the education that we provide. But we also know that a focus has to be on the ability to pivot quickly based on data. I wish I could say right now we definitely know exactly what everything's going to look like week number 1, week number 2, week number 5, week number 10, but we know there's going to be some changes that are going to occur as we walk through that. And again, flexibility is going to be crucial as we go through this process. Some of the key aspects, one of the things that we are doing, we know the elementary has early dismissal for the first 5 days for input conferences. That's something that we've always done. We are going to really have fairly consistent and tight, for the lack of a better word, bubbles at the elementary level within the classrooms. A lot of the work, especially the first 2 weeks, are going to be done within those classrooms. So we'll be able to keep those students really close together and not have a lot of interaction across grade spans, grade levels, some of those aspects. So as we've looked, and this is a change that our secondary staff have brought forth, some of our administrators have brought forth, they've talked with some of their leadership teams. We're going to start with a kind of a graduated approach at the secondary level so we can start building out some of those bubbles. As you heard on some of those videos, our routines, because health and safety routines are going to be crucial to ensure that we can continue to have any frameworks of face-to-face learning going forward. So on Monday, August 24th, we will have 7th graders present at the junior highs, be able to walk with them through a full day, go through the health and safety, go through the lunchroom routines, go through the hallway routines, go through the classroom routines and the hand washing routines and all those other components that are important. And then that Monday we'll have 10th graders at the high school. Tuesday we'll have just 8th graders and 11th graders. Wednesday just 9th graders and 12th graders. And then depending on how everything goes, because again, flexibility and fluidity are going to be crucial, we'll start that Thursday potentially with the 3 grade levels at both junior highs and the high school. Some of the other key aspects of this, we have, I think as everybody knows, offered online instruction for any family students that would want that for any of their K through 12 students. Right now we're roughly around 16.5% of students that will be online. So about 84% of our students plan to be face-to-face. We've expanded hours for our health office technicians to make sure that all of our health offices are fully covered throughout the day. We've separated, as we talked about before, our nurses station with a staging station for those that might have any signs or symptoms of potentially having COVID. Again, Mr. Gersma talked about the sanitation stations throughout buildings that we're going to have in multiple locations and utilized frequently, as well as hand washing frequently throughout the days. We're having many, many modified routines and protocols for lunch and passing time and busing on and off, as well as recess and other things. We do and have purchased the misting machines that will disinfect daily high-touch areas, classroom areas, our buses, certain other areas within our buildings, which will allow us to kill and eliminate the virus. And then again, we're requiring masks where we can't social distance within our classrooms, within our hallways, within our daily routines. And again, we've said it's important, as we know how vital it is to have masks to help prevent the spread of this virus, that it's important that we have those when we can't social distance. So that was a lot of information in a short amount of time, but certainly open to having thoughts, ideas, questions that you might have.
I know there's some questions, but maybe could you talk just about the team that put together this, that's been working on this plan, and who you've the experts that you've consulted, and where the kind of the background behind the recommendations, and where you've landed right now.
Yeah, so we went through a lot of this at the last meeting, so some of this is just going to be from memory, because some of our committees are still going on and going strong. Some of our committees have been phased out based on some of the work that they were charged with to focus on. So we had 7 different committees, subcommittees that worked on health and safety, that worked on curriculum instruction, that worked on social emotional learning as we look at helping to support not only students, but staff as well as we come back on our campuses to return to learning this August 24th. And we had multiple administrators, multiple teachers, parents, community members that were involved with these different groups to be able to target, pinpoint, and make specific recommendations in each of these areas to follow through with the best protocols in place for students and staff as we come back. So we had some really robust discussions, some really good discussions. Health and safety continues to meet, and we had the discussion this morning, probably will continue to meet as we start the school year, so they can make recommendations and look at how we're doing, what are the next steps, what do we need to do to change or be better in the work that we're doing. And that includes members of Mercy One, nursing staff, as well as multiple other teachers, some administrators. I know Janelle's on that committee as well. So just cross-section of people across our entire Cedar Falls bigger system. County Health Department's on that committee. I apologize. I should have stated that early on. And we continue to work closely with the County Health Department. Going back to Dr. Heisterkamp's question earlier, I think they're going to be crucial in the discussions that, my hope would be that their voice will be very powerful. If we have some local dynamics that don't meet the state's metrics, my hope is that they will state and be able to walk with us side by side to say, there's some challenges here. We need to reach out to the Iowa Department of Public Health as well as the Department of Education to be able to talk about some of those local challenges if and when that arises. They've been a great partner.
And Andy, with that, have you also been consulting with, other districts across the area, the region, to kind of, I know we're not all necessarily following the same recommendations, but have you been in contact with them just so everyone can, share knowledge, share thoughts?
Yeah, so now that you say that, I need to set up another Zoom with our local countywide superintendents. I was charged to do that, and I have not set that up yet. So we've been meeting, I think we've met 2, 3, 4 different times just within the last month to be able to have dialogues about each of our plans, what do they look like, because we want to be more similar than different as we look at what is our planning, especially across Blackhawk County. Waterloo has some different, just because of their size, some things that they're doing with some different phasing just to try to meet their needs of the size of their buildings. But we also know that the overall overarching plans are very similar as we look across our county schools. We also meet weekly as an AEA with all of our 56 area education agency superintendents. And a lot of those plans and discussions have been very similar in nature as far as the scope and the focus of what it looks like coming back in August.
do we have a good sense right now of how we are reworking our staff assignments? How many, for instance, of people were allowed to work online? How many were denied? How many people might be shifting to different positions? Do all those people know it? Can you discuss some of those things?
Yeah, so a big question. Most know online, not all. We're still working through some details. We have a meeting tomorrow that's going to focus on just secondary scheduling and course allotment. So we hope to be able to finalize some of those things tomorrow. So with this, especially at the secondary level, a little bit at the elementary or at the secondary, where you might have your endorsement in all social studies. You might have always taught 7th grade social studies. Now you might be tasked with teaching 8th grade social studies or even 9th grade, social sciences. So those are going to be things that now we just need to pen out, and we're trying to make those decisions on what are the baseline for student requests, so we can try to accommodate those requests based on what students have made, but also then the number of students and where those students that have opted into online learning, what does that look like, so we can kind of balance that. We've had to rerun schedules. We brought our counselors in last Wednesday to start that discussion. They're going to come back in, I think, next Wednesday. Tomorrow, Tuesday, with our building administrators as we walk through now what does that look like to build out those and finalize those schedules.
So do you feel that it's going to be a small number of staff at this point that wouldn't know at this point that they'd be, or could there still be some significant changes?
So significant is an order or a magnitude of kind of an order of magnitude. Right. I would say that we will still have, a dozen or so staff members that we will still have to talk with. Either A, what is the reasonable accommodation that they might have requested, or B, what does that look like as we try to meet some of their areas that they wanted us to meet, where it wasn't a required area, but still us trying to do our best to accommodate. Because we know we can't accommodate everybody that might not be in that required category, but we're still trying to be creative in that.
Additional questions?
You mentioned it a little bit, just things like people have asked me about other creative solutions they've seen in other districts, like is the hybrid, the 50-50 virtual, the distance learning and in person, or moving start days or other things like that?
Yeah, so this has been part of the process. We spent a great deal of time going through hybrid models, looking at options, looking at blended opportunities, synchronous and asynchronous within the educational world. One of the challenges that I've seen, how do you make sure you balance the workload for our staff so it's not expecting 12-hour workdays? Because in a hybrid model where you have, and again, some districts are doing this. I don't think it's right educationally or pedagogically, but they're setting up a Zoom camera in the back of a classroom for 8 hours a day and telling kids online, you need to follow along with that Zoom camera. Then they're saying, we're going to get through the full curriculum in a year. I think to do that in a way that's productive, if you're looking at a hybrid model, you're going to be asking staff, you need to work with your half classroom fully for the 8 hours a day, and then you need to be able to continue to check those students that are in the asynchronous model, the online model, where you might have given them learning targets or maybe some learning aspects to be able to learn during those 2 or 3 days that they're not present physically. So what's going to happen is then you're looking at a staff member to teach basically how they've always taught in that 8-hour day, and then check on students during the night, morning, off times, and you're going to be looking at 12 to 14-hour days for staff members. It's not attainable long term. It might be a good short-term solution, but long term it's not. Or the other option is you just say, we're going to only do half of our curriculum this school year because we're only asking you to teach half of what you normally teach to those in person, give them some learning targets as they're not in person, and then come back and reteach that to the other half that are there. Because to do that in 425 classrooms across their district with a Zoom camera in the back just is not feasible. or educationally, pedagogically good. So you're either going to burn people out, or you're going to use half your curriculum if you go a hybrid model long term. Or you're going to rely on really poor strategies.
Can you tell us a little bit about the CARES money and how we've been spending that?
Oh, a lot of different ways. So the CARES funding, I'd have to go back and look at the dollar amount that we received. I know Danelle can really probably speak much more on that, so I'm going to take the first stab at it. We purchased some devices for students. We purchased PPE. We have purchased sanitation stations. We have spent a large amount of dollars to put ourselves in a position to be able to have some face-to-face frameworks in place with all the safety requirements that are there. So it's been multiple different levels, multiple different layers to be able to help protect health and safety. Plus, if we go online, if we go hybrid, to have every student having their own personal device.
I don't want to hog the microphone here. I do have more. You want me to keep going? Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Orvis.
You mentioned the sanitizing stations, 120 of those. So that wouldn't cover every room in the building, every classroom. Or would we have other alternatives like normal hand pumps, those kind of things?
Yeah, hand pumps. We also have for every classroom spray bottles and wipes that are going to be allowed to be able to do some of those high-touch areas and wipe those down. Sanitation stations really are during those interactions and pathways between maybe going from one location to another location for staff and students. So those are what the intent of those sanitation stations are. In each of our, or at least a majority of our elementary classrooms, we do have sinks, so hand washing, trying to build that into our secondary schedules as well. How do you hand wash? What does that look like? And how do we extend out some of our passing times to accommodate that? Because that's going to be important too.
Contact tracing.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about how that might be accomplished?
Yeah, so that's something that we've worked closely with Blackhawk County Public Health. Had a correspondence with Nafisa. I can never pronounce her last name really well, so Nafisa. They are planning on hiring additional staff for contact tracers for schools. I'm not sure where that's at. The last correspondence I had with her was about a week ago, but they feel comfortable with that process.
Okay. Expectations of staff if they were to be quarantined, whether first if they're sick and second if they're not sick, and maybe what the remuneration, that sort of thing, how that might change depending on how they're classified?
Yeah, no, that's part of our FAQs as well that we put out for staff. Goes through the CARES Act. There's multiple matrices that are out there that show what that pathway looks like. I think our intent is to work with staff that if they're quarantined and aren't having symptoms, to give them the option to continue to teach virtually or online, whatever that might be, because we want to work with staff as much as possible, as best we can, but also to ensure that if they are sick, they're home and they use the CARES Act leave, or if they're extend past those, I think 80 hours, 10 days of leave from the CARES Act, which is above and beyond their other leaves that are provided by the district, then we utilize those leaves. So it's all pretty well designated through the CARES Act as well as just our leave process.
I have an idea that we might have parents who are deciding to homeschool and haven't really talked to anyone at the school about this. So could we see ourselves in a situation where at day one we've expected several students to show up, but they don't show up? And one of the things that would seem obvious that's going to impact the following year, because those students will no longer be in our head count, which will decrease funding for the following year. So are we going to follow up with no-shows, or is that our common practice to follow up with no-shows?
Yeah, common practice. We've been doing that now for multiple weeks to reach out to parents with multiple contacts if they haven't registered or contacted the district. So we don't have very many right now that we don't know what their plans are. So that's just something that I think people expect if they don't register. They know we're going to reach out and contact them and be fairly vigilant in that contact.
And remind them that we do have an online option And whether or not they choose to use that, it would still be nice to sign up for that. They get those benefits of the online instruction, and it helps us in 21-22 school year.
Yeah, every year we'll have people, and again, we respect people and parents' right to choose what that educational model looks like, be it private school, public school, homeschool. So that's something that we have every year, and we work with parents through that process.
How is professional development going to change this year? Have we moved any days around for professional development? I'm assuming we're going to be talking a lot about social emotional learning, and what it's like for the staff to come back, what it's like for students to come back, those sorts of things.
Yes, and yes. So all of it. So social emotional learning, health and safety, some of the still online components that we know is going to be important as we look at moving in and out of a hybrid model. Knock on wood, if we meet metrics to move into an online model, we know that's going to be important pedagogy as we look to the future. So yeah, we've moved some things. You would know as a teacher the TSS time and TSS days and reallocated those. We front-loaded some of that time, which is teacher supplemental salary for the summer, to be able to front-load some of the work that we knew we had to go into the school year. We actually ended the school year early to be able to get 2 professional learning days as well in June and kind of flex some things into July based on that as well, so we could do the best we could to provide some pedagogy and practices that are going to hopefully serve us well as we look to the next the unknown of the length of this pandemic, if ever.
Andy? Nate?
Go ahead.
Am I on?
Go ahead, Mr.
Okay, a couple questions. First, kind of circling back to the staff assignments, is there any, I know I've talked to you a bit about the possibility of a delay for the pandemic health reasons, but has there been any talk for staff who may not know their teaching assignment at this point in order to help them prepare to be for this upcoming school year? And then my second one, I'll get it on while I'm on, because it's kind of awkward here. With janitorial and the additional cleaning and sanitizing, I can imagine that adding the misting of each room to each building will add a significant amount of time to the duties already that our janitorial staff already have. Is there additional hours for them to be able to accomplish this in terms of additional hands or more hours allotted? And if not, how do we assure that this daily sanitation routine is taken care of? And thank you.
Yeah, so I'll answer the first question first. The districts that have extended out the school year, typically that I've seen, districts that have said, our plan was to go online. We need additional time now to adjust from that. There's some components that we know there are going to be some things we're going to have to support some staff on because they're shifting to online. Might be teaching some courses, some sections that they haven't taught in the past, but I don't think that warrants shifting the start of the school year significantly. We have seen some other districts that moved up their start date. I think back in June, July, there was some discussion that the second wave of the virus would happen around Thanksgiving, so they followed suit with some of the universities across the Midwest to say, let's move up start dates so we can be done earlier before maybe winter break or Thanksgiving break. So some of those districts are now, the headlines in the paper are moving start dates, but they're actually moving back to August 24th, the original start date. So second question, we've actually done time studies with our custodial staff on their misters. There are some things that we'll need to do differently, potentially in routines, to be able to make sure that we get the sanitation and the work done with those misters in the appropriate way. We might not be able to do some things that we've done daily. It might now have to be shifted to every other day in some cases. But we've worked with our, at least Rick Gersma and his staff on that as we've looked at how do we make sure that we have the right time to do the right work, to do the things that are necessary.
I guess if I had to ask, what is the priority, say, for the janitorial staff in a given shift? Is it misting those classrooms daily? Is it doing, you mentioned shifting some assignments, maybe from every 2 days to every 3 to 4 days? Just can you give me an idea what that would look like for them?
Yeah, so, sanitizing the high-touch areas are going to be first and foremost our priority. We have 2 shifts with our custodial staff. 1 shift during the day, the highest number of people in the 2nd shift after students are gone, and they work really focused on cleaning areas. Restroom cleaning, high priority. Sweeping a hallway might not be the highest priority every day. We want to make sure that things look nice and are clean, but making sure that we get the dust bunny from the corner of the hallway is not going to be our highest priority as we look at sanitation and ensuring that those areas are really done well. Because, again, we don't expect students to be down on the floor touching some of those surfaces. So those are the prioritization that we go through. Different components, the misters we know on average will take 5 minutes per room. As we look at the custodial staff during the time study that we did, we feel comfortable with the work that needs to be done.
Additional questions?
I have a couple, if I may. So I know you've described here all of the various approaches that are going to be taken to ensure the safety, health, well-being of our staff and students. And one key piece of that is going to be face coverings. And, this was mentioned by Ms. Schultz, I think, in her comments earlier, that there are some of the images that have come out of across the country of schools restarting and students walking through hallways without any masks on. I just wonder what the approach is to the education of the mask wearing and the support of our staff who are going to be required to enforce this important part of keeping everyone safe.
Well, I think just as in society, we have different viewpoints when it comes to mask wearing. That's really one of the reasons why we provided the option of going online. So if you, as a family, as maybe a student says, I just will not wear a mask, we have an online option for you. I believe we have some staff as well, more than likely, just within the sheer number of staff that will say, I don't want to wear a mask. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's necessary. That is something that we can expect and certainly edict, and that's our expectation, that everybody within our buildings that are unable to social distance will wear a mask. We have that ability, we have that authority, and that's part of the expectation when you come into our buildings. If you can't social distance, that will be done. So I fully understand the question, but I think it's one that when we have somebody, especially a staff member, that if they say, which I can't imagine they would say this to students, hey, take your masks off. Even though we're not social distance, don't worry about it. We'll address that and deal with that. If we have students that say, hey, let's just take all our masks, our masks off in this room, we'll deal with that. No, that's not acceptable if you're not socially distanced in the hallways or other locations. And that'll have to be done on a case-by-case basis. Training, we'll walk people through. There's some different modules that we will have all of our staff go through that talks about proper fitting and wearing of masks, face coverings, and we'll have to do some very similar things with our students too.
I appreciate that. It's not comfortable for anybody, it's an awkward thing, but I think with the understanding that it is for the community good, it's to help keep everybody safe,
Yep.
that hopefully we can get through it together. I also wanted to know what the status is on substitute teachers. I know that inevitably there are going to be staff who will have to be out, teachers who will have to be out for a variety of reasons. And I also know that oftentimes substitutes are retired folks who have decided to come back and act as substitutes, and so they are in higher risk categories. So how are we handling that? What are we anticipating as far as that goes?
Yeah, so a couple things. The state eased the requirements for substitutes in the state of Iowa during this upcoming year, which I think is going to help us immensely, especially with the University of Northern Iowa right here in Cedar Falls. It's easier to be able to get the sub endorsement. There's 2 different pathways. One's a sub license, and that means you're a full teacher and you have the teaching license, you have unlimited sub ability. In the past, a sub endorsement, there was limitations on the amount of time you could sub per month, as well as the consistency and length in one sub area. That's now been removed. So the sub authorization allows us to be able to use more people more often, which I think is going to be beneficial. The ability to get that sub license, if you've gone through, and I believe it's your level 3 experiences, but it might be level 2 experiences, you're able to get that sub authorization and sub part-time. So having some of those conversations with different people about how does that look to be able to give some of our aspiring teachers an opportunity to actually sub in the classroom as they get that sub authorization, I think is going to be beneficial for us, especially as we look at our local demographics.
Great, and then just one last comment from me. I appreciate all of the thoughtfulness and research that all of you have been putting in to help us figure out how to navigate this really challenging time. We as board members rely on your expertise and your communications with our local health officials and the state Department of Education and health officials to help guide the district decisions on how we move forward. And so just know that I am grateful, as I would imagine all of us are, for the work that you've been doing, and confident that the decisions that are being made with the best information that we have available to us.
I said this in my letter to back with all staff. I think board members received that. I think everybody in education right now has a level of anxiety. You know, I think the decisions we're making are based on the data that we have today. Tomorrow may look different, and we're going to have to be fluid and flexible. As a superintendent of Cedar Falls, we make decisions based on what we believe we do know and what is best. But we also know the input that we received has been really, really good. But as a parent as well, you know, I think about my 6th grader and 3rd grader going back to school, and we selected and elected for them to be back in person. So you weigh all those different dynamics, the things that we have in place, the layers of protection that are there as a parent. And again, I have much more insight than maybe other parents. I feel comfortable having my children in school.
Just another comment from this end, you know, having taught for many years and still teaching now, you know, I understand that our staff are going to be put in situations that it's counterintuitive to what they've done over the years, that we want to get close to students, that building those relationships are so important to us. And I ask that our students have some grace for our teachers, that things aren't going to always go as well as we hope, that our staff has that same grace toward our administration and vice versa. We know that, for instance, if you're doing evaluations, that these are not ideal conditions under which to be evaluated, but we still have to do some level of evaluation, and that the technology won't always work, and we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to find holes in even a well-developed plan. We're going to find out that things are not as simple as they looked the first time around, and we're going to come up against these contingencies. So I do appreciate all the understanding that we show each other during this time, and that's so important.
Oh, and looking out for one another. And this is what I would say to parents too, especially parents of younger children. And it's hard to say this because, again, my wife taught kindergarten for 12 years, and one of the things that she always enjoyed was the big hugs. We just can't do some of those things. And I know both my kids, as they go back to the elementary school, will see former teachers, other people, and their first instinct is to go up and hug them. And again, we've been talking about that ability to stay distance. We've been working with our children on how do you wear a mask and starting that comfortability of wearing a mask, because they will wear one throughout the day, probably for a fairly lengthy amount of their day, especially as we start the school year. So it's important that as we look at the next 2 weeks, to help people get accustomed to be able to talk about the why behind it too. And the why really is not to protect us, but it's to protect the other people. So it's there, we're wearing these face coverings and face shields to protect my parents and our children's grandparents. And that's the reinforcement, as Sasha said earlier, that we I think is important for all parents to be able to talk with their children as they come back to school on that purpose.
I think we had some other questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Oops, now you can hear me? Got the cone of silence on my head over here. Maxwell Smart, that's another like
Don't take your
earlier reference.
Just don't take your shoe off, please.
What's that?
Don't take your shoe off, please.
Don't take my shoe off, right, exactly. Again, I would echo what has been said with a deep appreciation for the decisions and the protocols that have been discussed and shared tonight. It's been very, very helpful and very educational, and I hope those who are watching this now or who watch it later understand and appreciate all the efforts and the thoughtfulness behind the safety components to all of those moving parts, because there are many. I think of all this that we're doing and how diligent we are in thinking about safety precautions and protocol, and I am just constantly plagued by the fact that we as a county and as a state are letting us down because we haven't been able to contain this virus, and we continue as a state to be in the red zone with other states who have failed to comply with basic principles of safety, and this is something that we're asking our students and staff to take very, very seriously when, as we all know, there are mixed messages out there that these are items of fear and not to be, not to delve into, and it gets really ugly, absolutely ugly. It puts us in such an awkward spot because of the seriousness of this and the lack of consistent support and guidance, which is concerning. I spent the weekend visiting my daughter in Minnesota, only to learn that Minnesota, because they have a 5% transmission rate, are not comfortable with a full-blown face-to-face, but are going to do a hybrid for at least the first couple, 2 or 3 weeks. And here we are, almost twice that as a state, and feel like our hands are tied. I guess, Andy, I just want you to know that when it makes sense to shift, and in the district statement on August 4th, and as was reported in the media, continue, our baseline will be face-to-face, and we'll do that until otherwise dictates that we shift and that we change. And I'm thinking, just since August 4th, we've gotten worse here in Blackhawk County. Sturgis is happening right now. There are going to be all kinds of hot spots that pop up all over the country, including ours and in our area as well. And that concerns me. And I'm wondering, looking ahead, and you said this tonight, what happens, what the numbers are today, 3 or 4 days from now, it could be very, very, very different. And in COVID terms, that the start of schools is quite a ways away yet, right? Because of how things can change. What are you thinking in terms of your metrics and our district's metrics as to? And by the way, I love that easing into the registration and the teaching and training process of going into this very unique year with our students, and how that in and of itself gives a soft launch to the start of the school year. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts and between now and then, and how will we know when it makes sense to be a little more conservative and say, let's not all rush back together, because as all the professionals tell us, it's a density issue, right? We can wash our hands and wear masks and do all those great things, but when you pack people in together so closely for such a long period of time, with a virus like this, as we know, there's no 100% guarantees. We can mitigate it, but we can't prevent it. And it's a density issue, and so what's been your conversation? What's your thinking around that? How can we help and support when a time comes that we do need to back off for a week or two and try it again, right? And we will know that that things are simmering down or they're continuing to heat up, right? I mean, it's a kind of a day-by-day, week-by-week basis. But how can we help?
Is it okay if I answer a couple of the other?
Yeah, I lost track of how many questions I
No,
even
that's good,
mentioned
because
over
again, a
here.
lot of important points in there that I think are important to kind of denote and pull out. So I've had discussions with hundreds of people on kind of all sides of the return to learn. You know, we need to go online for the next 2 years because we don't know what it's even going to do if this virus changes to, you know, if we're not face-to-face, we're going to never come back to Cedar Falls, period, because they need to be face-to-face 8 hours a day forever.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to note that you're right. It's really what we do, certainly over the next 2 weeks, but what we do as we transition back to school to help mitigate the spread of the virus. If we're out in large groups, not wearing face coverings, doing things that could cause that virus to spread at the rates that we see or grow in those rates, we won't be able to go and continue with a full face-to-face model. That's just not going to be feasible or possible. So it's really on our shoulders to say we need to help mitigate that, control that, and I think that's important to note, and there's ways that we can do that. You know, we have several things that I think are going to behoove us as we look to some of those numbers. We do know that easing in with the secondary schedule is going to help us to be able to see, are there pockets, are there bubbles, are there issues? Are students having symptoms as we have them self-screen and work with parents on symptoms and things like that, so we can hopefully adapt quickly if all of a sudden we're seeing different areas where there's rises in infection rates or grade levels. Number two, UNI starts a week before us, and you talked about some of the community activities. That's going to be a huge indicator of spread and rates, and that is something we are going to watch very closely. And I wish I could say to people that, yes, that's August 17th. We might not be able to tell you until August 23rd, that Sunday, exactly what's going to look like on Thursday, August 27th. But again, there's multiple factors and multiple components in our community that we just have to have our thumb on to be able to continue to watch to see what that looks like. We will continue to evaluate data, to look at data, to make sure that we're trying to make fluid decisions based on what's best. And I think I said this before, we want to make sure that we're using a scalpel and not a chainsaw. We want to make sure that if we have an outbreak in third grade, we can focus on those third grade classrooms and do what's necessary because we built out the bubbles. If we have an issue with a secondary student, that we're containing some of the interactions and passing times and classroom seating arrangements to make sure that we can contain that in a finite way. So we're trying to support and eliminate instead of cancel everything on one fell swoop. So it's trying to be mindful and wise and looking at the data. As we've looked at all the different metrics, you can't use positivity rate as the only metric. And in fact, I think that's a poor metric to use. You need to look at the rate of infectiousness, the amount of contact between those that have infectiousness. And I even think county-wide data can be deceiving at times because, again, there's pockets within a county and community that are seeing outbreaks. We could have a positivity rate of 3%, but all of that 3% could be in one of our junior highs, one of our elementaries, and that makes a different context versus saying we're 5% countywide, and it could be a different outbreak, different location. So there's so many different things you got to be mindful of and think about, not just one number or two numbers.
Well, you bring up a good point with regard to numbers, because another strong recommendation from, as I would surmise, some of the top voices on return to learn from the medical and the public health field has been with regards to access to testing, and Jeff had mentioned tracing and really tracking down who has that person been in contact with, et cetera. This is another challenge that we have as a district, because in this country, we have access, we have professional athletes have access to tests that will tell them in 15 minutes whether or not they're positive, and yet we have other folks in this country who are waiting 3 to 5 days to hear back if their tests are positive or negative, and that may not even be accurate. When your conversations with public health, here in Blackhawk County, what access do we have to testing? How will we use that as a strategy along with the tracing piece to really inform us as to how things are going?
So I think the first layer, even before testing, is self-analysis for symptoms, self-assessing for symptoms, that we need to track that very carefully, and we will, that, what is the percentage of students that are not at school today, staff that are not at school today because they've exhibited symptoms that could be COVID positive, even before testing. So we can start making sure that we are seeing what are those patterns, what does that look like, and if you are negative but have symptoms, there is a period of time within the matrix that you self-isolate, even testing positive or negative, so we need to make sure that we track those carefully. Blackhawk County, and I think it was Iowa Department of Public Health, now have prioritized staff and students as being able to access those testing and testing sites fluidly and having the priority to be able to be tested. So that helps us immensely. We're in a position too where we have Mercy One as our nursing staff, and I know we've been working closely with them on options. We've not seen their final options yet as far as all that we might have available through them, but they have certainly said we want to make sure that we provide some opportunities too. So I think there's some options for testing. I think our hope was that we would have access to rapid testing, the 15-minute test. Test Iowa sites aren't 15-minute tests, and they've opened those again to all students and staff within a school district. So we need to make sure that we help inform people what those options are and what those look like. And then you can also go through your individual private provider, your health insurance carriers, which we have for staff to be able to move through and get tested too. So there's multiple options.
No. You feel satisfied that our students and staff will have access to those tests if and when they need them?
I do. If we don't, that's another one of those data components that we need to weigh into our decision-making matrix that says if we're not able to fluidly and quickly have test results back, we need to pivot. And I think part of that ability to understand what is that test timeline, what is the response rate, and I think what are the number of false positives or false negatives to help us make better decisions, because we're finding and seeing that there's a higher rate of some of those false tests. So we need to be able to, and I haven't asked that question at our local level, if we can track that or know that, but that's something we need to be able to help determine.
You mentioned school nurses. Those of us in K-12 education have watched over the decades our funds deteriorate to the point where we no longer have the luxury of having a nurse in every building because we've had to cut, because we have not funded public education to the extent that we should be funding it. Now we're in this crisis, and we now need to rely on the expertise of those whom we don't have access to anymore. And I preface that because I'm wondering, and it goes to our board goal with regards to financing schools, right? We're on the beginning time of understanding the impact of the financial situation in Iowa for our schools, and we've heard other states talk a little bit about lack of shortfalls in funding, primarily in higher education, and that's just going to work its way continually to K-12, and we don't necessarily know today what our funding looks like a year from now based on what's transpired with COVID, et cetera. But it does, I think, speak to the skepticism and the concerns that I think those of us in public education are not necessarily convinced that funding and supports will be there when we need them, whether it's additional supplies, staffing, materials to mitigate what it is that we're doing in this unprecedented time. And I just want to, I empathize because there aren't no easy answers or responses to this, and there's a lot of work ahead of us. That's for sure. But again, I'll just end by saying I appreciate, Andy, your thoughts, and the staff and those who have worked on this. We as a board need to meet next week or the week after before school because things have changed, then so be it.
We can. Yep, exactly.
Andy, I think I'd like to follow up a little bit on what Alan just said, because he did kind of reference, the role that the board has. And I think in Cedar Falls, we've been really lucky to have productive and supportive boards because we're very respectful of the authority that is given to us by the state, and we work within that authority and within the checks and balances that it affords us with the district. So, I just want to make sure that our people watching understand the role of our board is to support. We have a very defined role in what we do and what we don't do. And it's important that, our main role in what's happening right now is really to do what we're doing tonight, question, show concern, share concerns with our constituents, but is to share those with Andy and his leadership team, and then allow them, the experts that we have hired as a board, to be the experts. They are speaking with people. They are working with the experts in the field. They're working with our health officials. They're working with other districts. So I want to thank you for that, just as everyone else has. I think that's really important that we continue to do that as a board. I think we've seen in the state different boards are doing different things. We've not been an activist board. I think that is a very important distinction to make, and I think that's appropriate for us. And if we are not happy with that, we do have authority to do other things, but there are certain things we can do and certain things we can't. So first of all, I do want to thank everyone for doing what they've done. I think a lot of what we're talking about tonight is uncertainty. That's the hard part, because we all are asking questions and everyone is asking us questions. They're asking Andy questions, and we all want answers to those questions. Those answers are not readily available today, nor will they be readily available tomorrow. And I think each of us comes to these situations usually with our personal vested interest. It's our children, it's our job, it's things like that. When we come to the board table, we do have to take all of those things into consideration, and we take all of our stakeholders into consideration. I think concerns that haven't been raised yet tonight have been the long-term impacts of this. I think yet we don't know as a district what not being in school for spring, how that impacted our students. I have a senior in the high school this year who is getting ready to try and retake. She's going to take the SAT. She's going to be retaking the ACT. Those are concerns that we don't yet know the impact of not being in school this spring, nor would we know the impact of being out of school this year. We don't know how this has impacted or will impact our students who have food insecurity or aren't safe at home. We've heard from a lot of our working parents that are concerned about being able to go to work should we not be in school. We've heard about parents like we did tonight who have concerns about being in school. So I guess I'm just encouraging our community to understand that everyone really is doing the best that we possibly can with the information we have that is the best for all of our stakeholders, because we are dealing with so many of them. So I guess I'm just asking for respectful dissent and respectful consideration that people really are wanting to keep our students and staff safe. We are trying to make the best decisions we can, and I hope that when people are interacting with us, with our teachers, with our administrators, with each other, whether that's personally, on social media, I hope people can remember that we really do, to get through this successfully, we do need to start coming together as humanity and just as fellow human beings with each other. I think we've lost a lot of that over recent years, and it's important that we all start modeling that for our students who are going to be our future citizens, and just start trying to be respectful of each other, even if we strongly disagree and vehemently disagree. So I guess that's what I would ask of us, of our staff, of our students, and of each other as we move forward in this. I wish we had all the answers. I know you do as well, but I thank you for what you've done, and I'm excited. I also work in higher education. I'm excited to see our students back. I know they're excited about trying to see how the school year is going to progress for them. So I'm going to do the best to be optimistic but cautious. And thank you for everything that you've done.
Thank you. Civil discourse, so important in this day and age. So thank you for that.
Yeah, re-emphasizing a word that Andy mentioned at the beginning, flexibility. we'll, as much as the plans that we have today, ask us in 48 hours, or ask you in 48 hours, and it could be different. So, again, thank you very much for all that you and the staff have done. Are there any other questions or comments?
Jeff, I got one. This is
Yeah.
Nate.
Go ahead.
I really just, I know I pushed on you and I pushed on Andy a little bit in the past month or so. And it kind of bounces off of what Jenny just said. But I do think that the approval of this return to learn plan, regardless of whether we agree with it in principle and who's, or not, I do think that this is an issue that should rise to board consideration and approval. And I would like to see that happen, but work that Dr. Petit has and his staff has done in preparing this plan. I know that there's been a lot of limitations placed on it, but I do think that this is a policy issue that rises to something that we should be considering as a board.
But Jeff, this is not a policy we are voting into place. I mean, Nate, respectfully, I disagree with that. If I did pull up the handbook that defines what our role as a board, this does not fall under what is specified from the Iowa Association of School Boards as what our role is. And I really think all that would do, I think it would do a disservice to our board. And I think it would serve as a vote of lack of confidence in our leadership as to all the work they've done. That's just my personal opinion. So,
Can I share my thoughts on that? And again, it might not be completely positive, but hopefully it's taken in the right context. It's not meant, you can't replicate the hundreds of, almost thousands of hours that have been spent with multiple groups, committees, different subgroups, different community members to walk through all the different dynamics in a board meeting. You just can't replicate how much finite detail is garnered. This is where I hope you don't take it out of context. Because you don't have all that finite detail, some of those different nuances, the trainings that we've gone through, and you've seen this with other boards that have been asked to have this burden on their shoulders to say, make a decision, thumbs up, thumbs down on masks, thumbs up, thumbs down on platform, thumbs up, thumbs down on curriculum components. It shifts that burden from me, the person you've hired, to make those decisions to you without having the background of all of the work and all of the guidance and all of the components that's come out of this. If this doesn't go well, again, this is recommendations that have been made by me. These are things that we've done as processes and protocols. And again, you can't replicate all that time devoted to this as a board. It's impossible for you guys to spend that amount of time. That's why you've hired me as the superintendent. That's, as Jenny said, you have really 3 requirements. Number 1, hire and fire the superintendent. Number 2, policy and procedures. Number 3, fiscal and budgetary responsibility. This, to me, is one of those educational components that you have hired people to make those decisions, to move forward, to collectively make good decisions based on the system.
No, thank you very much for that, Dr. Petit, and I would just echo to say that you, if you feel like you, and I think Dr. Heisterkamp mentioned this a little bit, that we're supportive of you and all the staff that has put in countless hours to this, and if you need to pivot or make another move, that you have the support of the board. That means a special board meeting or whatever, that we're here to support our school district and support the administration staff and to support you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, I am going to move on to item number H, Board of Education goals. It's just that time of year.
It is. So this is really for Board of Education goals and superintendent goals. Typically, we've set committees, if anybody is a volunteer, to research goals, bring back goals. We still have some goals that we're working on, just due to the fact that COVID hit. And We did not send out a survey to recent graduates, which, because of COVID, we didn't think we'd get a high return rate on that, but I think that needs to continue, and we've got a draft survey ready to go, and the foundation's ready to send that out. Now it's just a matter of continuing on some of that work. So some of these goals will probably be in continuation because of some of the things that happened in the last 6 months, but certainly would love to have kind of a committee work together to help set those, to bring back recommendations to the full board.
So we're looking for volunteers for Board of Education goals and superintendent goals, basically a small subcommittee just to look at those, review those, and bring them back to the full board so that we can discuss them and approve them at this level. So Board of Education goals, I'll volunteer. Jenny, you'll volunteer? And Sasha, oh my goodness, we've got
So how many do you need?
3 for max. So, are you okay if, okay. Would you be on the superintendent goals? Thank you. And are there a couple other individuals for superintendent goals?
Yeah.
No? Anybody else for superintendent goals? You okay? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Orvis.
Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. Moving on to superintendent's report.
Yeah, just a couple different things. All school welcome, again, to be determined on the format for that. I can't imagine we're going to try to get 800 to 900 people together in one room, so we know that will look different. This year we are actually having a speaker that will come in as well, Devin Hughes, really going to focus on what we talked about earlier, some of the social emotional components. I think his discussion is going to be focused on how do you kind of build inoculation against anxiety and stress? What can you do? Positivity, what mindsets, what does that look like? So just understanding not only some of the brain research surrounding that, but just some of the strategies that we can all use to try to overcome some of that anxiety and stress that we all are facing in this day and age. Facility discussion, we're continuing to work on the new high school, different components with that, with some of the exterior construction components, some of the buildings and grounds on the exterior, and what some of the landscaping will look like. And then equity discussion. This is so important, as we talked about within Title IX and that policy component. Dr. Heisterkamp mentioned this earlier as well. We are continuing to work with our equity committee. They've met I think 3 different times this summer already. I know Dr. Heisterkamp was involved with the last meeting as kind of the board representative. We are going to have a statement that the equity committee worked on that we'll release here sometime soon as we look at some of our goals, some of our strategies, some of our outcomes with our action plan on how do we overcome some of the systemic racism that we know is present, but also some of the things that we know we need to change and get better at. And we've really built goals around 4 areas. Some of our student work, some of our staff work, some of the work that we know is going to be important with our parents and community, and then finally as an entire system, what are we doing to make sure that we can change, learn, listen, and grow much more fluidly and do better as we look to the future. Dr. Heisterkamp with Equity Committee.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, for the record, they've met 5 times.
5 times already. Thank you.
And they have, there's also subcommittees that meet
Yep.
as well. So as you mentioned, the statement coming up shortly, but they have an action plan, and of course, we can have a policy, but without any action or practice, then we don't make any changes or reflect and move forward in a way that we need to, as was mentioned. Just with regards to the students, as Annie mentioned, so this kind of ecological approach with staff, with the community, families, the broader community, a survey will be, if not, will be assessed and getting some more feedback from students on top of the stories and examples that have been shared and communicated out back to the public. So that's what they're working on. Listening rooms, being able to identify and that's creating the hospitality for all students as we continue to grow to be more racially diverse, etc. Staff members from professional development. Iowa Safe Schools will be returning to Cedar Falls School District and their staff working with our staff and continuing that relationship. You'll remember that last spring or last winter they did some work with around gender equality, and Nate Munson's staff there is outstanding, and they do great work across the state of Iowa. They're a great partner for the district, absolutely, for all districts. And you mentioned families. I guess one last thing I would say with regards to looking at, and here's the exciting fun part, I think, is looking at opportunities to enhance and support curriculum around diversity, equality, and racial equality for sure. But when we talk about Title IX, and we talk about protected classes, and with some of the revisions with Title IX, on top of our concerns about racial equality, is that we need to look at all forms of discrimination and harassment through the same lens of equality, and that practices, procedures, how do I report an incident? If not me directly, to my friend who identifies as Black or African American, and I'm not happy with how they were treated, and I want to let somebody in authority know. What do I do with that information? What do I do as a friend? How do I respond to the peers potentially that have treated my friend in a disrespectful, derogatory way? What options do I have? And I think I know for a fact that students at the high schools are having some of those discussions in a variety of areas about how to be that good friend with each other. So just really appreciate the coordination, Tara and Jill and others. I'm not mentioning all their names, I know, but they have been just a well-oiled machine in terms of identifying goals, coming up with action plans, and at some point in time being much more communicative about what's going on. So they've done a good job. Appreciate their work.
Thank you for serving on that committee.
Welcome.
There be ways that we are able to get consistent updates on that work, and then specifics. I know, I think part of the concern with what's happened this summer and raising awareness is it's very aware, you're really aware, and everyone talks a lot about it and makes a statement, and then nothing concrete or significant or sustainable happens. So is there a way that we can build that into the work the committee is doing so that we can talk about those maybe quick things that we can move on really in a short-term way, but really what those long-term actions are going to be with some kind of time frame, and then maybe how we're measuring whether those things are resulting in the outcomes that we're hoping for. So if there's a way to keep us updated on that, Alan, that'd be amazing.
I'd be happy to do that and add to that just maybe presenting here, Tara, or just do some updates if they're able to do that. That would be awesome. Or some students as well. I'd love to see students share how they've been involved.
Yeah, we've talked that potentially at one of the upcoming board meetings to have Tara or Jill, potentially one of our student reps from the equity committee to get the student perspective, and then potentially one of our community or parent reps as well, and have kind of the three talk about the work through their lens of what's happening. So I think that's important, plus the metrics and the overall action plans that we're using to enact the change that's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of the other areas that I know are going to be critical to being successful in this work are diversifying our staff. And I know Adrian has been working on that for quite some time, and that's not always an easy thing to accomplish. But maybe, I don't know, if there can be partnerships with colleges of ed around the country, and if you've worked at all with you know, the historically black colleges and universities to do that work. But that would be one thing, and then the other piece would be curricular. You know, how are we really examining our curriculum to make sure that we're providing a holistic vision of our history, our society, and not just seeing all of our content through a particular lens.
So yes, we have action steps around both those and action plans around both those. And some of it, we have great programs, African-American students, minority students in our system that through the CAPS program, that's part of our hope is to initiate some action steps. And this was Dr. Talbot's suggestion too. What can we do as we recruit those students to potentially explore education, teaching as a pathway to be able to then, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years after that CAPS experience, having opportunities to interview, potentially be employed by our system so we can build a systemic process. I don't remember the exact data, but it's a very high percentage of classroom teachers in the state of Iowa live within 35 or 45 miles of where they grew up. So we know, growing our own educators is extremely important and something that I think we can do within this context as well.
When you mentioned that, Sasha, I thought the other indicators that they had mentioned in the plan, just a couple. One, it's gone up to a slow start, but the new conditions for learning, which is, again, a slow start because of COVID, but that survey will provide districts with some really important information, disaggregated by the students that the school serves, and give them feedback on how they're feeling with regards to their relationships with not with their peers, but also with the adults in those buildings. And then also just our attendance and our student data, looking in terms of how conflicts and how responses to student behavior is dealt with and practiced, and restorative justice practices, I think, was also mentioned with the committee. So a lot of really good digging into some multiple areas. Yeah.
There are 3 things tonight we mentioned that in and of themselves would be huge to tackle, and challenges when it comes to COVID and education, when it comes to the equity challenges, when it comes to Title IX implications and implementation. We're trying to balance all those things simultaneously, plus multiple other things, which is just, I think, true to the times that we're all in as educators, as businessmen, as parents, as name your profession, that it just seems like there's multiple big things that we're trying to juggle all at once. And all of them are important. All of them deserve very focused and dedicated time, and that's part of the excitement as we look over the next multiple months to implement all of them well.
Thank you. Any other further comments from board members?
Just one quick question back to the facility discussion. Obviously, save money, our sales tax will probably be down for the coming year unless we have one heck of a Black Friday coming up. Do we expect that to cause any delays in the construction of the high school?
No. When we've looked at that data and some of the fiscal analysis that's been done, actually the revenue estimating conference for the 1 cent sales tax, there's a dip, but there's an estimate that will come back. So there's always the extra payment to kind of true up the end of the year balance. I'd imagine that won't be as significant as years past, but I can't imagine that the dip is going to be that dramatic. They always set that as a fairly conservative estimate, and what we've seen as the future estimates does not look like it's going to be a large dip based on the per pupil allotment statewide.
We may also have a benefit due to the fact that the Supreme Court determined that online sales are subject to state taxes. So even though maybe people are still purchasing, maybe the overall volume is down just a little bit, but certainly I think the online sales tax, we are now getting the full benefit of that. So although I share your concern, we'll see what the numbers are. Any other? Shop local anyway.
Yes.
Absolutely. Our local businesses need your help. Yep. Any other comments?
I have one, Jeff, this is Nate, and I hope you'll pardon me for a prepared thing because I want to get my thoughts in order, so give me a second here. Again, I want to start out by thanking Dr. Petit as well as the members of our teaching faculty, district staff, and everyone who has spent hundreds of hours to develop and implement our return to learn plans. What you've done these past few months is tremendous. I know I speak for many when we say I recognize and appreciate your efforts in these times of ever-changing uncertainty. I realize the governor's proclamation of July 17th severely limited our options, and I believe that the decision on how to best begin the school year is better made at the district, at the state level. What we have seen in our own community, what we have seen in our summer programs, and what we are seeing in other states as they try to begin to return to school, all support what the experts have been trying to tell us, that this virus can still spread quickly among groups of people. And even more so when social distancing is not possible or the recommended precautions such as masks are not followed. I believe we should have strongly considered starting the school year fully online for at least 4 to 6 weeks with reassessments as the situation progressed. I did inform President Haspin and Dr. Petit of my preference. If we are returning to the buildings, I believe that a hybrid in-person plan like we discussed today, where students are in our buildings at most 3 days in a week, is best. This should also satisfy the current 50% requirement while minimizing risk as much as possible. I recognize that these are not easy choices and everyone's situations are different. I believe that we as a district and as a community can be part of finding solutions so that the safest option can be something that works for all. In the last week, we have seen many school boards in Iowa voting on their return to learn plans, and many of those districts that are larger, similar to Cedar Falls, have voted to support plans that ease them back into in-person learning. Because there has been no formal action taken by the board tonight to approve the district's return to learn plan, I would like to note with my remarks my opposition to the goal of returning to mostly in-person learning as dictated by the state. My wife and I have chosen to start our daughter in the online learning option due to safety concerns, and we're thankful to have that flexibility to do so. We chose this not only to protect our own family, but to protect the community by ensuring that there is one fewer student in the classroom. I have heard from many who share our concerns, as I know it is for Dr. Petit and everyone who helped develop our return to learn plan. Protecting the health of our students, our teachers, our staff, and the families they go home to is foremost in my consideration of this matter. If I'm wrong about the potential spread of COVID in our schools, great. I'm happy to be wrong, but I'd rather err on the side of safety than to have even one person lost due to the spread from within our schools. I respectfully disagree with Director Lieber on the role of the board here. I believe the board should have given formal approval to the district's return to learn plan because of the approval of the policies that will hopefully keep our students, our teachers, and our staff safe during a sustained global pandemic is something that rises to the level of board priority and consideration, in my opinion. If the board had been offered the chance to vote on the in-person return to learn plan, I would have likely voted no to the in-person option, precisely because of my care for all our district's learners, teachers, staff, and families. With the first day of the school year quickly approaching, I hope that each family is able to make the choice they feel most comfortable with, and that they are reaching out for assistance if they need help to make that choice work for their family. I know that we will keep a close eye on what is happening in other schools across the nation and locally as well at our universities as they attempt to return to in-person learning. This will continue to be an ever-changing situation. We must be prepared to make adjustments and changes as needed for everyone's sake, and I believe that the district is prepared to do so, as evidenced tonight by Dr. Petit. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further comments, I want to just thank all of my colleagues for being a volunteer on the school board at very trying times. And I want to thank all of the staff, administrators for all the countless hours and for really this is a passion and we just want to thank you for stepping up and doing what's best for our kids, and I appreciate that, Dr. Petit, from you as well, and we'll certainly keep us abreast of everything that's going on and let us know how we can support you and the rest of the staff and teachers and the whole district. So thank you very much. So with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Mr. Orvis. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Same sign. Meeting adjourned. Thank you for joining us this evening.